beautiful, lovely people out there. So let me be the first to say, welcome aboard the Fort Dearborn here, and for those who are new, welcome to Chicago. I'll be one of your captains today. I'm Captain Ken Lee. We also have Captain Brian right here at the top of the ramp. Their crew today is C-Roy right here at the top of the ramp, and down below, Captain Alex. So folks, if you have any questions, any comments, or any concerns about the ride, please feel free to find one of us also. We'll fix that for you. Now, if I get everyone's attention, please, I do have a very important safety announcement to make. The Fort Dearborn is licensed and inspected by the U.S. Coast Guard, which means we have all the required safety equipment aboard. For those of you on the upper deck, if you take a look at the lighthouse behind me, you will take a see a life located on either side of the housing. There's also a life located to the back of the vessel by the stairwell. And if you look at any river benches on the top deck, you'll take some light jackets down below. Now for those of you on the lower deck, if you are back toward the bar and you look behind the stairwell, you will find a life ring located there. There's also a life ring located forward of the bar on either side of the housing. And again, for those on the lower deck, back toward the bar, if you look above your head, you will take the rest of the life jackets above you. Those pulling the bungee cord don't come right out. Folks, I ask that you please don't tap on any of the safety equipment aboard the vessel, because it is all for emergency use only. One of the highly unlikely cases of emergency, one of the crew members come around and give you further direction from there. But to avoid anything this beautiful day, folks, we all just need you to work with us here. Throughout the duration of the tour, please refrain from stepping on any of the benches, any of the chairs, lean or sit on any of the railings. Please walk around the vessel at all times, do not run. Please use the handrails while looking down the stairwell to the back of the vessel here. And please don't step on the stairs or by the stairs. Let's keep that area free for the flow of traffic. This is a no smoking tour, so please refrain from smoking anything that is digital and or analog while aboard. And folks, need to have a conversation with your neighbor, maybe a newfound friend. Out of respect for the tour and your fellow passengers, please take all loud conversations directly to the lower deck out of earshot of anyone. And for those of you on the upper deck who have not found it yet, from the top deck, go to the back of the vessel and down the stairwell, you'll find the bar. At the bar, we have plenty of complimentary amenities such as nice cold ice water, lemonade, varieties of tea, coffee, hot chocolate, as well as free Coke, Diet Coke, and Sprite provided behind the bar from your bartender, Joseph. Folks, Joseph also has plenty of adult beverages for sale, personal credit card, and/or debit card, as well as snacks. Last but not least, we go forward to the bar, folks. You will find the heads indoor restrooms with the windows being over to the starboard right side of us and forward to the bar. Men's to the port left side of us and forward to the bar. And now, no more further ado, it is my privilege to introduce to you today your tour guide, Endor Dosen. Folks, Ed is one of the best in the city of Chicago. He's quite knowledgeable. You're going to learn quite a lot, and here he is.
Okay, thanks, Captain Lee. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Fort Dearborn. As Ken said, my name is Ed. I'll be your talking head for the next 90 minutes. We'll be cruising on the main branch, south and north branches of the Chicago River. Folks, you're in the third largest city in the United States. Only New York and Los Angeles have more people scurrying around their streets, avenues, and byways than does the city of Chicago. We're a little larger than Richmond, California, young lady, okay? Anyhow, the population of Chicago is about 2.8 million. About another 10 million people live in our metropolitan area. We have folks from 108 different countries in the world who live inside the city of Chicago. And we have a very interesting group of people on board. As I went around and asked folks where they were from, welcoming you to our Fort Dearborn, we have people here from Colombia in South America. We have people here from France. We've got a couple people sitting up here. They live in the south of France. When they go to Paris, they take the train out of the Gare du Sud. We have people here from the north of France. When they take the train to or from Paris, they go out of the Gare du Nord. We have folks here from Vienna in Austria. Wonderful. We have folks here from East Lansing, Michigan, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. You know what that means if you follow college football at all. You've got Spartans from East Lansing and the Mays from the University of Michigan. One is doing a lot better than the other this football season. Anyhow, we've got folks here from Portland. We've got folks here from southern India. It was a little hot there in India this summer, so we're glad to have you with us. Right now, you can cool off a little bit. Folks, on your right, this building on your right was a warehouse building, originally twice as long as it is today. It's undergone adaptive reuse. If you're a building, that means it's like plastic surgery. Its function has changed. Today it's called River Loft, a 2-bedroom apartment. Rents, pay attention, this is your sister, $5,000 a month. She must be an orthopedic doctor, not a pulmonologist, okay. Anyhow, it also has an exercise facility. The building has a jazz club, great pizza restaurant, a Mediterranean restaurant, art studios, and more. The boat is turning. You figure that one out. On your right, folks, those are $1.5 million to $2 million townhomes. 50 years ago, there were warehouse buildings over there. If you look through the leaves, you'll notice little gray structures up on the roofs of those townhomes. Those are storage sheds. Think of that. You spend $1.5 million to $2 million for your principal residence, and you don't have enough room to put away your lawnmower, your snowblower, or your lawn chairs. You end up with a storage shed on top of your master bedroom. But you could say you live in Streeterville, one of the trendiest of the 79 neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. Okay, we're now heading east. First building I'm going to bring to your attention will be on your immediate left. This is a 66-story high condominium and rental building built in the 1960s by 2 architects named Shipwright and Heydrich. Everyone who lives in this building must have the same color window shade. No individuality choice, okay? The building is composed of glass, steel, and iron. At the very top of the building, you'll notice that round structure. That, my friends, is a restaurant français, French restaurant, tray share, very expensive. It's only open for dinner. 3 credit cards, 1 credit card for a starter, 1 for an entree, either beyond or croissant, and 1 for over the years, some very famous people have lived in that building. A woman by the name of Winfrey lived there for about 18 months. She moved out. She lives wherever she wants to live. But we still see the main squeeze instead of the brand wandering around the world. He appears to be in a daze. David Axelrod, the political consultant, lived in that building. A Chicago Cub outfielder from the Dominican Republic by the name of Sammy Sosa had 2 units in that building. One we assume he slept in when he kept his baseball bats in. Should have magical properties because they're Brian Sandberg, Hall of Fame second baseman for the Chicago Cubs, lived in that building. Also, Alice Cooper, the musician, when he was performing here, Golden Mike, also lived in that building. Scottie Pippen of the Chicago Bulls lived in that building. Many, many more. Out to your far left, folks, those concrete walls of the University of Omaha, Minnesota. It is a lot of folks who come into Lake Michigan, come in from Lake Michigan. This will be on your test today, so pay attention. There are 5 Great Lakes. Only one of the 5 is 100% non-Tazoese inside the United States. That's Lake Michigan. All the rest we share with our great neighbor to the north, the country of Canada. Representing Canada today from Toronto, Ontario, right up here and way in the back from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Always glad to have Rudies and Tooties here. Thank you, Canadians. Okay, we're going underneath the Jean-Baptiste Poindexter Lakeshore Drive, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Bridge. If you can remember all that, ladies and gentlemen, I will sign your application for membership in Mensa. We call it the FDR Bridge because President Roosevelt dedicated this bridge in the late 1930s. He gave a very famous speech here, Quarantine the Aggressor. His speech led to a program called Lend Lease. I by which the United States provided agent boats and munitions to Great Britain and the members of her empire. Very important. Europe went to war September 1, 1939. The United States not until 7 December 1941. Okay, I'm going to work your left-hand side first. We'll cover the right-hand side on the way back, and that's not a political statement. The first building I'd like to bring to your attention, these three beautiful steel and glass towers. That is called the St. Regis. It is a condominium and a hotel building. It's 101 stories high. The 71st floor in that building is a 4-bedroom, 10,000 square foot condominium. It just sold for $20 million. The purchaser, a millionaire from Mexico who owns a company called Grupo Mexican. They make a lot of money. Anyhow, the architect, 5'4" tall, Jeannie Gang. She's an architectural genius. The curves in the steel are to represent movement on the river and the lake. There are 7 different shades of tinted blue glass, reflecting the colors on the Chicago River and the lake. About 17 stories down from the top, there is an open floor. That is intentional. Folks, you're in Chicago. This is the Windy City. All of our tall buildings, shimmy, shimmy, cocoa pop, they move just a tiny little bit when the winds blow. So someone who lives in that building or works in that building, they don't want to have to be hooked on Dramamine all day long. So the architects have come up with a concept called a blowhole. An open floor, it sucks in the breezes, you don't feel the building move at all. She's an absolute genius. Jeannie Gang is her name. Next on your left is a rectangular glass building, clear and opaque glass, coming out to us at an angle. That is the Swiss Hotel in the city of Chicago. Currently, it's the only Swiss hotel in the United States. The architect is deceased. His name was Harry Weiss Jr. Harry was a sailor, in addition to being a brilliant architect. And he always tried to get his clients to let him work sailing themes into the project. So, what appears to be that rectangular glass wall, when we go by it, will turn into a triangle, like sails on a ship. Now, directly behind the Swiss Hotel is a 70-story high building with beautiful, sensuous, curved concrete balconies between each floor. That building is called the Aqua, A-Q-U-A for water. It is a condominium and rental building. The architect, that 5'4" tall, Jeannie Gang. Every one of those balconies is different in size. She used computers, CAD/CAM in their design. Now, directly in front of the Aqua is a very important building. It's rectangular, dark steel and iron, narrow, dark tinted windows. That style is called International Modern. And we associate that with a German-born architect by the name of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe was the last head of the Bauhaus School of Art and Architecture in pre-Nazi Germany. When they took over, they closed the school. He was unemployed for 7 years. He came to Chicago. He became the head of the School of Architecture at our Illinois Institute of Technology. That building is the model or prototype for tall buildings all over the world from the 1960s to the present day. Next on your left, the Hyatt Regency Hotel on Wacker Drive in Chicago, 1974 to 1980. An East Tower and a West Tower. The architects Abraham Epstein and Sons. That hotel has 2,042 sleeping rooms, more than any hotel in the city of Chicago. But if you stay there, you only have 2 responsibilities. Remember which tower you're in, the east or the west, and what your room number is. And even after you've had a couple of our famous cocktails, that should not be a problem. Okay, let's give the right-hand side a little opportunity. Directly in front of us is a white terracotta building with a clock tower. That is the Wrigley Building in Chicago, 1925-1926. Based on buildings in Seville, Spain. That was the first air-conditioned office building in the entire world. It was the headquarters for many years of the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company. Coming up on your right is a short 1-story glass building with a very thin roof. That That is the Apple Computer Center in Chicago. Lord Norman Foster of London, England, architect. That is supposed to be a laptop computer with the lid down. But on that site, between 1780 and 1800, Chicago's first permanent non-native settler, a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Poindexter, had his farm, his home, and several other buildings. Then he moved down to Peoria, Illinois. As you can see, he was of French and African descent, married to a Native American Potawatomi woman. So in Chicago, we had diversity before the word was even coined. Okay, we're going to go back to your left. This is the beginning or the end of the Chicago River Walk, depending what direction you're coming from. We borrowed this idea from San Antonio, Texas, but we've elaborated on it. On your left, there is that curved building that's called the London House. That was a hotel in the Beaux-Arts design, an attempt to recapture the flavor of ancient Greece and Rome. Corinthian columns at the bottom and the top. They have a very nice cocktail lounge on top. Right in front of that hotel from 1923 is a triple-deck roadway. It's called Wacker Drive. And to make it more interesting, folks, it goes in all four directions. And if on Wednesday nights on NBC TV, you watch Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, they are frequently filming in front of that building. You might get lucky. You might bump into Taylor Kinney. Who knows? Okay, coming up next on our left is a building that has these wide horizontal stainless steel and aluminum bands with those clear and opaque windows. It says Royal Sonesta near the top. There is a penthouse apartment on top of that sign. That was the home to Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight and the Batman movies. You got to remember, folks, Chicago was Hollywood before there was a Hollywood. We had Charlie Chaplin, Lillian Gish, Gene Harlow, Tom Mix, his horse Tony, and more. Then they said it's a little cold here. October, November, December, January, February, March, and April. We're going to head out to those orange groves on the West Coast, see what life is like. Now they come here to film interiors and exteriors. Okay, the water temperature today is about 67 degrees. The main channel of the river here is about 30 feet deep. And as you can see, a beautiful October day like today, everybody is out. Off on your left, there's a building that has a rounded temple at the top. We call that a belvedere. Two shorter temples on either end. That's from 1927. That's called the Jewelers Building. When that building first developed, it had an elevator for automobiles. A jewelry salesperson or someone with a lot of glitter could drive their car into the elevator and would take you up to whatever floor you wanted to go to. It minimized the chances of a jewelry salesperson or someone with a lot of bling being relieved of it involuntarily. Remember, folks, this is not Virginia Beach, Virginia. This is Chicago. We have a reputation to live up to. Okay, next on your left, a two-tone gray building with black and silver vertical rods in the middle of each window. Those are called mullions. They give the building a sense of depth. That is the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency building. So if you started the day with something sensible, like Quaker Oats or Rice Krispies, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, if you drive a Jeep, a Fiat, if you drive a Dodge automobile, if you have Eggo waffles, and many more, all the advertising campaigns behind those products, 1,000 more, come out of the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency building. Nutmeggers, okay, it's always good to have nutmeggers with us. We've got some more back there from Fairfield, you know. Okay, back on your left, a white granite building, delicate aluminum in the windows, culminating in a triangle at the very top. The architect, Ricardo Bofill from Barcelona, Spain. That building is supposed to represent an ancient Greek or Roman temple. It's actually based on a column that you would find in the Italian city of Florence called the Campanile. If you remember a movie from the 1990s called Negotiator, featuring Samuel L. Jackson, almost that entire movie filmed in that building. Okay, next on your right, left rather, there are these concrete steps. We call that the auditorium. So you might wonder, where's the theater? Folks, you are the theater. You wave at them, they're liable to wave back at you. What did I tell you? Next on your left, we have a building with a tall center part, shorter parts to left and right. That's from 1928. That is Art Deco. Art Deco is described as long, narrow verticals, indentation, decoration at the top and the bottom. As buildings went higher and higher in the 1920s and 30s, cities like Chicago became concerned about light and air. So we adopted regulations called setbacks. In Chicago, when a building went above 30 stories high, you had to level off for a certain amount before you could go any higher. That's a good example of that. Okay, right in front of us is the double-deck Wells Street Bridge. Chicago has 52 bridges on its main, north, and south branches. Only Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has more bridges than the city of Chicago. They have 54, we have 52, but who's counting? Now the upper level of this bridge is for the Chicago elevated trains. I guarantee you, we will show you some of our elevated trains. By the way, we do not use the word elevated in Chicago. Forget it. We say L-E-L. If you use the word elevated, people will think you're aliens from another orbit, like Alf. You'll be charged double or triple wherever you go. And the L makes an oval around our central business district. So we call the central business district the Loop, L-O-O-P. Okay, coming up on your left here is a granite building with a Roman arch in the center from the 1980s. It's one of several buildings on the Chicago River by a New York architectural firm, Kohn, Pedersen, and Fox. The Roman arch in the center of that building pays respect or homage to the fact that Chicago was the busiest domestic water port in the United States for over 90 years. We're also the railroad capital of the United States, and we have the second busiest international airport in the United States, O'Hare Field. The only busier one, Atlanta, Georgia's Hartsfield International Airport. Okay. That architectural style is known as conceptualism. It blends in with a series of buildings from 40, 50 years before. Then coming up here on your left is my personal favorite building on our river, by the same architects, Kohn, Pedersen, and Fox. You have over 450 feet of curved green glass, several shades of green reflecting the algae bottom of the river here. Towards the base of the building, green marble, gray granite, cut in ways to resemble decking on a large ship. There are no windows at the bottom, because when the L train crosses that Lake Street Bridge behind it, it makes a big racket. And the developers felt they would not be able to lease out the lower levels at the high rentals they wanted to charge. So they put the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning down at the bottom. Okay, now if you go back to your right, you see two buildings going up here. This is called Wolf Point. It was the first settled area by non-Native Americans in this area in the 1830s. The land and those two buildings are owned by a family. You may have heard of their name before. They're originally from Boston. Their last name is Kennedy, like Joe, Rose, Jack, Bob, Ted, Alice, and so on. Okay, we're heading up the North Branch of the river. And the first building we're going to encounter on your right is a rental apartment building on Wolf Point. All that glass, very delicate steel framing. It has several outdoor swimming pools, a hospitality room with 10 large TV monitors, and more. Rentals for a two-bedroom here are only $4,700 a month. It's a mere pittance, you know. Okay, now, the real attraction to living in this apartment building is they have a resident veterinarian. Think of that. You have a dog, you have a cat, you have an armadillo, you have a koala bear, whatever, and it gets sick. They'll come to your unit, take care of your pet. You live in this building and you get sick, you dial 911, and you hope they will eventually come for you. Okay. Very nice photo op right in front of us. It's a bridge in the upright position. The bridge hasn't gone down in 70 years. The bridge was originally built by the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. Today it's owned by the Union Pacific family. And we've got some people here from Omaha, Nebraska back there, the home of the Union Pacific Railroad. Okay. Now, the architect of this bridge is a man named Joseph Strauss. Joseph Strauss was the architect of the Golden Gate Bridge in California. How does Ed know that? It was the final question on Jeopardy about 6 months ago. Okay. When the bridge did go up and down, it delivered goods and took goods from businesses all along the main branch of the river, which no longer are operating. Okay, we're coming up to the Kinzie Street Bridge, what I called the Dave Matthews Bridge. Several decades ago, Dave's bus was crossing this bridge. The bus driver said, "This is a great spot to empty the sanitary tanks." There was another company's boat underneath. Getting married? Good. Okay. Wish him well. Anyhow, we ended up with 6 free concerts, big fines for Dave and his band, but more publicity than any press agent ever could have delivered for Dave. On your right, folks, this is the East Bank Club of Chicago, opened up in 1990. At that time, this entire north branch of the river was either a homeless encampment, decaying warehouses, and other buildings. This is probably the most prestigious athletic and social club in the city of Chicago. All the powerful and beautiful people in Chicago belong to the East Bank Club, and those who would be beautiful and powerful. When it opened up in 1990, there was no ivy, no trees, no windows, just ugly concrete. So ugly we called it brutalist architecture. No one wanted to look at the river because this river was considered to be the 5th most polluted waterway in the United States. We've really cleaned it up. The EPA now says it's only mildly polluted. We see every sort of boating activity on this river. Tour boats, barges, tugboats, kayaks, canoes, power boats, sailboats, but I've never seen anybody voluntarily swimming in this river. Okay. So the East Bank Club is open from 6 in the morning until midnight. You can drive your car in the morning, have it washed, waxed, lubed, and oiled while you're being lubed and oiled. After you've worked out, we have a restaurant to eat in, shops to shop in. But when that building opened up, it acted as a spark plug, and this entire north branch of the river that we are now on began to undergo and continues to undergo dramatic changes. Coming up on our right is an example of adaptive reuse. This was a Baltimore and Ohio railroad warehouse. When the B&O people vacated around the mid-1960s, developers Papa George and Hames moved in. They kept the 16-foot high ceilings and added those metal balconies. In Chicago, like many other cities, an older building with metal balconies attached to it tells you that yuppies have moved into this area. About 300,000 gets you a tiny one-bedroom, and then you can watch boats like ours 9 months in the year. You want to park in this garage? That's currently $250 a month. Seem outrageous? Not if you're from New York, Philadelphia, Boston, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, then it's like free. Okay, coming up next on our right is a building that has these very interesting angled windows. This is a rental apartment building called Park Place. If you remember Monopoly, Park Place was a very desirable property. It was right next to Boardwalk. The architect of this building, a man named John Cordwell. Mr. Cordwell was a prisoner of war in the Second World War. When he got out, he studied architecture, and then one day he was working in the Russell Square Tube area of London. He met a young lady from Chicago. That was it. He packed up all of his materials, followed her back here, romanced her, and they lived happily ever after for 54 years. Next on your right, a building with white horizontal steel, white chevrons. We call that style industrial chic. The architect from the 14th arrondissement in Paris, France, Lucien Lagrange. Then straight back, a building with Granite on either end, clear and opaque windows. That building from 1986 was the headquarters of the Montgomery Ward Corporation. They were the Amazon Prime of their time, the first catalog house in the United States. The architect of that building, a gentleman named Minoru Yamasaki. Mr. Yamasaki is the architect of the original Twin Towers in Manhattan, circa 9/11. Today that's a senior citizen building called the Montgomery. This park area here is called Aaron Montgomery Ward Park. Aaron Montgomery Ward, the founder of Montgomery Ward, started in the 1870s with a one-page flyer selling to people in rural America. Within 5 years, he had a 400-page catalog and began to open up retail stores in the United States, parts of Mexico, and parts of Canada. They would last until the beginning of this century, when they fell victim to changing consumer tastes, shopping on the internet, and a management like so many others that did not know how to deal with the new technologies associated with computers and elsewhere. But he had a big influence in the city of Chicago. He chose this area on the river because it made it easy to load and unload merchandise and to ship merchandise out. So his administrative offices and his warehouse located in this immediate area on the north branch of the Chicago River. Coming up on your right, this was a Montgomery Ward administration building from 1927. The style is Art Deco. Long, narrow verticals, indentation, decoration at the top and the bottom. By city ordinance, when you adaptively reuse an older building or build a new building along the river, you must provide a public pedestrian walkway. So the developers of this building, Papa George and Ames, had to cut out the bottom level to provide that public pedestrian walkway. This is a condominium building at Chicago Avenue in the north branch of the river. Coming up next on our right is a building that was the Montgomery Ward Warehouse building. Over 400,000 square feet of space. Today it's commercial and condominium. The building was built in 1907. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the words Groupon. This is Groupon's world headquarters. Now this architectural style is known as Prairie style. Illinois is the prairie state. So that means once you leave Chicago, we're long and flat. If you were to drive from the Illinois-Wisconsin border to the southern tip of Illinois, that is a 9-hour drive. And the southern tip of Illinois is further south than Richmond, Virginia. We've got someone from Richmond, Virginia with us today. So prairie-style architecture is characterized by long horizontals, short verticals, and some decorations. Probably the most famous prairie-style architect was a man named Frank Lloyd Wright. Mr. Wright had nothing to do with this building. There are hundreds of prairie-style architects. He did very little inside the city of Chicago. Mr. Wright lived in a suburb to the immediate west of Chicago called Oak Park. That's where he and his associates designed about 30 homes, the famous Unity Temple. That's where he fell in love with the wife of one of his clients, Mama Cheney Borwell. She fell in love with him. Slight problem. Both were already married. Both had 3 children by their respective spouses. Didn't faze them. They would leave their families. They ran off to Europe together, followed by newspaper reporters. It was considered to be so scandalous. They would divorce their spouses. They would never marry each other, but they would live together. And then in the 1920s, she and her 3 children would be murdered by a deranged house servant at their estate in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Okay, behind us, where those iron pilings are, that is called Goose Island. It is the only island in the Chicago River. It's called Goose Island because the first people to reside in that area were immigrants from Ireland in the 1830s. They had a lot of domesticated geese, which they used to augment their rather limited diets. If you come back 5 years from now, there'll be 6 tall, high-rise buildings on that island, single-family homes and apartment buildings. Okay, we're now heading south on the North Branch. Off to your right, This is an area we call River West. You'll see a building that says Chicago Tribune to your right. And there'll be another building coming up that says Chicago Tribune also. The Tribune is one of our 2 daily English language newspapers. It is printed here, along with its competitor, the Chicago Sun-Times, about 35 other foreign and English language newspapers, including the Midwest editions of the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the Morning Register, Florida Sun Sentinel, and much, much more. Now look at this building. Designed by an architectural firm called Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. One of the largest and most distinguished engineering, architectural, and design firms in the world, headquartered here in Chicago. You'll notice the building doesn't have any windows. Do you know what the name of this building is? The Freedom Center. Look at it. It looks more like a maximum security institution than a Freedom Center. Behind those walls are 7 huge printing presses brought in from Stuttgart, Germany, each capable of turning out 8,000 traditional newspapers an hour. And hardly ever does it, because people don't read the traditional newspaper. When you read on the internet, your phone, or somewhere else, you don't read it all. Because you don't know what's going on. Okay, anyhow, about 2 months ago, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, announced that this location here to your right would become the site of Chicago's only legalized gambling casino. Folks, can you believe that, Chicago? Our reputation. We don't have a legalized gambling casino. Unbelievable. Anyhow, allegedly Bally's out of Delaware State will put up a casino with 4,000 slot machines, 800 gaming tables, a hotel, entertainment venue, park, and much, much more. So the people that live in these condominium buildings off to my right, they're not exactly happy about this idea because there'll be traffic problems they feel. There are maybe some negatives associated with having a gambling casino as your neighborhood. But we shall see. Anyhow, there was no one here except Native Americans, Potawatomi, Winnebago, Chippewas, until 1673. In that year, a French Catholic priest, Père Jacques Marquette, and a coureur de bois, a runner of the wood, Louis Joliet, came through this area, and they claimed all of this area for the Empire of France. France wasn't interested. 1754, France and England went to war. It was fighting in Europe, fighting in India, fighting in the 13 colonies, and fighting in Canada. England wins. This becomes part of the British colonial empire. That nasty King George III and his advisors, they looked at their treasury, and they basically said, we went bankrupt defending our colonial cousins in those 13 colonies. Let's ask them to help build up the treasury. Let's put a tax, for example, on tea. You know what those folks in Boston did? They dumped that tea in the harbor. That harbor hasn't recovered yet. How do you think the Green Monster at Fenway Park got its name? Osmosis. The result, the American Revolution. When that war ended, this is the American West. There's nothing west of where we are today that belonged to the young USA until our 3rd president, Thomas Jefferson, sent Lewis and Clark on an expedition to the Pacific Northwest to meet Sacagawea and open up areas that would become the Rose City of Portland. And we've got some Seattle people with us, Walla Walla too. Okay. The first Europeans to come here in any large number were the Irish. There was a potato famine in Ireland in the 1830s and 40s. 1/3 of the population of Ireland will starve to death. 1/3 stays behind, but 1/3 hopped across the pond, across the Atlantic. Folks, if you're ever here on the 17th of March, it's a big day. St. Patrick's Day. I've been in Dublin. There's nothing to do. They go to church and drink. Heck, we do that every day of the year here. On the 17th of March, we dye parts of this river, Kelly green, 10 o'clock in the morning. When I was a kid growing up here, we thought it was a national holiday. All the public schools were closed on St. Patrick's Day. City Hall was closed. The county building was closed. and none of you are dressed appropriately. Forget about wearing a green. It's usually freezing cold here on the 17th of March. Okay, on your right, folks. This is called Kinsey on the Park, 1990s. 30 townhomes in the Federalist style. 4 stories high, rooftop decks, elevators. The columns in front are called Doric, D-O-R-I-C, the simplest form of Greek architectural column. Federalist architecture, if you visited the seafront on the Atlantic Ocean, from Providence, Rhode Island, down to Charleston, South Carolina, you would find buildings that somewhat resemble these styles. This is a public walkway in front, but it is a closed or gated community, open to the public from sunrise to sunset, and it is closed, and only people who live in this development can gain access. Now, when these came on the market in the 1990s at $500,000 each, people said they'll never sell. This is a polluted river, a homeless encampment on my right. All 30 townhomes went under contract in 3 weekends. You want to live here today? $1.5 million to $2 million. Coming up next on our right will be the river cottages of Harry Weiss, the architect sailor. They're 4 cottages from the 1980s. Originally they cost $450,000 each. They're 6 stories high. They have elevators. They all have docking in front, twisted staircases, rounded windows, all sorts of water-related themes. Currently, there is one on the market. They're asking $2.4 million. Not everybody's cup of tea, but it's not an A-frame, that's for sure. Coming up next on your right is a pink brick building with a lot of windows. This building goes to 1907. Originally, it was a cold storage warehouse. No windows at all. Well, Harry Weiss, the architect sailor, said, we're going to turn this into apartments, condos, and offices. It took 14 months for the building to fully defrost. They encountered 7 feet of horsehair insulation between the outer wall and the first inner wall. Eventually, 2,000 semi-trailer trucks of insulation were removed from that building. Coming up next on our right, the River Bend condominiums. The architect, James DeStefano, at that time was Skidmore, Owens & Merrill. 6 3-story townhomes at ground level. 6 levels of parking. Valet parking only. The turns are too narrow to let us park our own cars. And all the windows in those condominiums, every single window faces to my right. They face east. There are no windows facing west. Because when that building went up, there were factories, warehouses, and railroad tracks there. Well, the railroad tracks are still there. Amtrak and commuter rail, factories, warehouses, all gone, replaced by other high-rise buildings. The next building on our right here is basically an office building with several very nice restaurants. Those round circles with the oscillating fans because the building sits above railroad tracks, and those remove as much of the diesel fumes as possible. The arch in front of that building is to reflect on Chicago's heritage as the railroad center of the United States. And that round red piece of sculpture done by a Spanish artist named Santiago Calatrava, and it reflects on the Great Chicago Fire, October 8th through the 10th, 1871, which I'll talk about later. Next on your right, one of our newest high-rise gems, very narrow at the bottom, because there are railroad tracks on the right, the river on the left. 60-some stories high, it looks like a glass tower. Now, you're in the Windy City, so what this building has, which is very unusual, on the roof, they have 4 giant holding tanks filled with water. When the winds blow from the west, the water pushes against it from the east. The winds come from the east, the water pushes against it from the west. So people working in that office building or eating at the very nice restaurants don't feel the buildings move at all. Okay, next on your right, a building with a logo at the very top. That is the logo of the Boeing International Aircraft Corporation. This is Boeing's world headquarters for about another year and a half. Boeing was originally located in the Seattle, Tacoma, Bellingham, Washington area. Then about 40 years ago, they relocated to Chicago. About 6 weeks ago, they announced they are moving to Alexandria, Virginia, so they can be closer to their main client, the United States Defense Department, and their competitors, Grumman and Lockheed Martin. They occupy 16 floors in this building. Now, the architect of this building, Ralph Johnson, this is a very challenging project. The building rests on those narrow, two-tone gray pillars that go around the perimeter or edge of the building. They go down to bedrock, 30 feet down in this area. And the building's construction went on while the trains underneath it continued to operate. So this was a very challenging engineering and architectural project, the Boeing building. Coming up next on your right is a building from 1928. This is an Art Deco building, 2 North Riverside Plaza. Long, narrow verticals, indentation, decoration at the top and the bottom, hollow boarded roof, architects. Now, the shape of this building was influenced by Sir Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut's tomb in Egypt in the early 1920s. The center of the building is thought of as the chest or torso on the Great Sphinx. The lower parts where those clocks are, those are the paws on the Great Sphinx. The Great Sphinx is located in the suburb of Cairo, Egypt, called Giza. Egyptian art and architecture, very important in Western Europe and the United States in the 1920s and 30s. Okay, we're going underneath the Washington Street Bridge. And if you turn your head somewhat to the right and look up, you'll see what looks like a glass waterfall gently cascading down. That is the Accenture Center in Chicago. It's an office building and a computer rail station. The architect, a man named Helmut Jahn. Helmut was a native of Nuremberg, Germany, lived in Chicago for over 50 years. If you flew into Chicago and you came through the United Airline Terminal, he designed the United Airline Terminal, the addition to Soldier Field, the Board of Trade, and more. Unfortunately, he was killed in a bicycle accident 2 summers ago. Next on your right are a series of buildings called Gateway Center 1 through 4 in the International Modern style. By that I mean rectangular, dark steel and iron, dark tinted windows, no external decoration. All done by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. They were the chief disciples of Mies van der Rohe. Now these buildings all sit above railroad air rents. In fact, I see some Amtrak passenger coaches underneath the buildings there. The railroads discovered in the 1920s they could make more money by leasing out the space above their trackage than by running freights and or passenger trains. At one time, Chicago had 9 major train depots in the city of Chicago. Think of our location here. We're halfway between the East Coast, the West Coast, the Canadian border, and the southern border of our United States. Today we have 1 major train depot and 2 minor train depots. Our major depot is called the Union Station. It opened up in the 1920s. It's a gray building about 1 block to your right, but you can just see the sign Union Station. About 40,000 people use that every day. 30-some thousand are commuters coming in from the south and north and west. And the rest, people who don't have to be anywhere on time, riding on Amtrak. And I'm a train person. Coming up next on your right is a 1-story steel building with X-Racing. This originally was a stock exchange building. People who worked in the stock exchange areas before they used computers did not want interior columns when they worked because they jumped and screamed and yelled at each other. So, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in the steel bracing, no interior columns. So successful that when they would design the Hancock Tower at Michigan and Delaware, 100 stories high, no interior columns, X bracing from bottom to the very top. The bottom of the Cheesecake Factory and on our locator to the top where the tilt is located. Coming up next on your right is a great granite Art Deco building that opened up in 1933. Graham Anderson Copes and White Architects. This building, 2 square blocks in size, was Chicago's main post office. It was actually the world's largest central post office for over 60 years. Then it was mothballed. It's undergone adaptive reuse, and today it's known as the 610 Center. It's no longer a post office, but it's home to Uber Freight, Walgreens Drug, Pepsi-Cola, Cisco Systems, True Blue, Milwaukee Tools, and much, much more. There is a federal interstate highway that goes right through the middle of that building. It is called Interstate 290, the Dwight David Eisenhower Expressway. He was President of the United States from 1952 to 60, father of our interstate highway system. He's a native of Denison, Texas. The second most famous person to come from Denison, Texas, the retired Air Force Captain Sully Sullenberger, who landed that jet plane on the Hudson River 10 years ago. Now, why did Chicago need such a large central post office? 2 reasons. Number 1, big is beautiful in Chicago. El Grande, okay? More important, we were the catalog center of the world, headquartered in Chicago. Montgomery Ward, Sears Roebuck, Spiegel, Alden's, 35 other catalog houses. This would have been the time of the year. Well, you probably would have sent in your order already. You had that catalog out on your table so that your mother, father, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandmother could see what you absolutely need or you would die. Any idea how many packages left the city to get to you folks by the holidays? Anyhow, on the roof of that building today, for people who work in that building, there is a pickleball court, a bocce ball court, dance floor, barbecue area, and much more. The interior of the building has wonderful mosaics from the 1930s and a tremendous food court. So on your right here, this is our newest main post office. Kind of blah. It hasn't really captured the fancy architects, critics, historians, or anywhere else. It's called the Cardis Collins Building. She was a United States Congresswoman in the west side, west suburbs of Chicago. Well, the only redeeming grace of this building is there are no interior columns in the garage, so that large trucks can turn around without backing up. Okay, something more interesting, I think, will be on your left. This is called the South Loop. We were here 10, 12 years ago. This was a slum. This would have been a homeless encampment. It became buildings and warehouses. Today, this is a very swanky area in the city of Chicago. Studio apartments go for about $400,000 to $500,000. 2 bedrooms up to $2 million. Now, the single largest employer in Chicago today is healthcare, broadly defined. From someone who looks at your brain to trims your toenails to everything in between. Second largest employer, higher education. We have 7 major universities in Chicago. We have a young man with us today. Get his name, because he's a drummer and a player. He's going to be famous. Okay. Anyhow, we have 7 major universities in this area. The 3rd largest employer in Chicago is government, local, state, and federal. 4 is technology, 5 is tourism. So this building on your left, for example, this is called River City, built by an architect named Bertrand Bolton. In nature, I don't see right angles. I see curves, circles, orbs, and arcs. And I don't like working in steel and iron. So the two would be competitors for the remainder of their lives. The shape of those windows, we call them the eyebrows of the south bridge of the Chicago River. The first floor of that building currently has a daycare center, doctor's office, dentist's office, a podiatrist, a shoemaker, and a small Circle K 7-Eleven type of grocery store. One bedroom here goes for about $300,000 to $350,000. So the building has become very popular with academics, with residents, interns who live in this area and work at our hospitals. You're very close to Rush Hospital, University of Illinois, Chicago Hospital, Loyola, Northwestern, and much, much more. Okay, go to your right. Not much to see, is there? Well, where it says DSW Shoes in that garage building, one block behind that garage is a very important location in the city of Chicago. It's where the Great Chicago Fire began, October 8th through the 10th, 1871, when this town burned to the ground. Chicago became a village in 1833 with 300 people. By 1871, 300,000 people were living in the city of Chicago. We had no building code to speak of. We only had 2 inches of rain between June 1st and Sunday night, October 8th. There's a 50-mile-an-hour wind. To my left, one-third of the firefighting I don't think that hopefully not. The story is a woman named Catherine O'Leary went out to milk her cow, named Daisy in the court records, at 9 o'clock at night. Is there anybody here that's ever milked a cow? Would you do it at 9 at night? No, cows are milked in the morning and the early evening. So the story may not be true, but it's a good story, so we tell it. Allegedly, Mrs. O'Leary went out with her lantern, put the lantern in the straw, grabbed a certain part of the cow's anatomy. The cow objected, kicked over the lantern. The lantern broke, the straw caught fire. Buffeted by that 50-mile-an-hour wind, within an hour and a half, blazing logs are crossing this river. All in the center of Chicago, our business district, government area, and so on, all the way up to Lincoln Park, where the Lincoln Park Zoo is, would burn to the ground. In a city of 300,000, 100,000 people would be left homeless, 30,000 structures destroyed, maybe 500 people would be killed. But interestingly enough, Mrs. O'Leary's cottage survived the fire. Her cottage faced west, the barn east, the winds blowing west to east, the barn burned, the cow burned, and the site of Catherine O'Leary's cottage today, the Chicago Fire Department Training Academy. Where else would you put the place? Okay, so we're now heading north, but we're on the south branch of the river. The captain had not turned us about. This river empties into the Illinois River, which eventually empties into the Mississippi River.
Itong ring.
3 weeks. We could have been down in New Orleans. Let the good times roll. Okay. Anyhow, 2.8 million people live in the city of Chicago. Breaks down roughly like this. 32% are people with Hispanic last names, primarily from the American Southwest and Mexico. We have about 20 to 30,000 people from everywhere else in Central, Latin, and South America. 31% are Caucasians, about 30% African Americans, 7% Asian Pacific Islanders. Okay, if there's anybody here of Polish descent, there are more people of Polish descent in the city of Chicago than any city in the world, except for Warsaw, Poland. Do we have any Lugans, any Lithuanians with us? Very good. There are more people here of Lithuanian descent in Chicago than any city in the world, except for Vilna, Lithuania. I could go on about the other 106 groups here in Chicago, but you have to sign up for the 16-hour graduate course. Okay. Now, we are heading south. Many of you noticed that tall black building with the two white television antenna on top. That is the Willis or Sears Tower, 1,453 feet high. Then you add another 300 feet for those white television antennas. The building opened up in 1974 after 10 years of construction. From 1974 until 2005, that was the tallest continuously occupied structure in the entire world. Now it's number 9 in the United States and number 23 in the world. Tallest buildings in the world today. All you have to do is follow the money and the egos. They're either in the Middle East or in Asia. Tallest structure in the world today is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Over 2,700 feet tall. In other words, almost twice as tall as the Willis or Sears Tower. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? The architect of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai is my homeboy from Chicago, Adrian Smith, a graduate of my university, the University of Illinois. So those folks over there had to come here to find somebody to put their Lego blocks together for them. Chicago architecture, it rocks. On your right, there's a building with a triangular shaped roof and a 32-foot high silver statue on top. It's actually aluminum painted silver. The statue is Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, the Roman goddess of grain and fertility. Perfect choice. That's the Chicago Board of Trade. That's where prices are set on everything you eat, wear, and much, much more. Okay, let's come back to the Willis or Sears Tower. The Willis Corporation is a huge conglomerate headquartered in London, England. They insure Lloyd's of London, among others. They bought the naming rights from Sears about 12 years ago. Now, the architect Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. The chief architect, a man named Bruce Graham. But the real genius, a naturalized American citizen from Bangladesh, Dr. Fazlur Khan. Sears wanted to put up one tower over 100 stories high, and Khan told them a strong wind will break it like a pencil. He was a smoker. He pulled out his package of cigarettes, dumped them on the table, picked up 4 or 5. He said, we've got to have interlocking towers. 16th floor, 70, 80, 90, and then up to 110. The building's 110 stories high. And he was correct. It's 110 stories high. You can only go up to the 103rd floor. If you look at the 103rd floor, you see what look like windows coming out from the side. Those are the famous ledges. The elevator will take you from the basement to the 103rd floor in 61 seconds. Then you walk around inside. Then your courage builds. Because you're going to notice people like this young man here. He's standing out on those glass ledges. He's 3 feet out over the street. Don't worry, you're enclosed. 20 years, we've lost nobody. We've only had one crack, and Gorilla Glue took care of it. The building is all commercial. There are no residences in that building. It rests on 30 foundations that go down 60 feet into the ground. So get your camera ready, get your cell phone ready. First, we're going past an office building on your right here. It has a mosaic on the wall, and that orange structure, that is where you are on the south branch of the Chicago River currently. When we get to the edge of this building, I'll say ready, aim, fire, and roll. The Willis Tower.
It's like a
Okay?
map. You go here, there's like a map. It's kind of cool.
Ready, aim, fire at will. Some of you are a little slow. We'll have to do what no other city would do free of charge. get a second chance. Don't forget, you're in the second city. This white building here, this is owned by the Molson Brewing Company. Well, they're owned by a South African conglomerate now. But it's a great Canadian beer. Okay, now, no left, no right. Just look straight up. Take your pictures again. When that building would be fully occupied, 10,000 people work in that one building. Currently, because of the pandemic, changes in our work styles, about 6,000 to 6,500 people work in that building on a daily basis. The building has 102 elevators, 900 miles of wire cable. And get this, when the winds blow really strong, the upper floors of that building have been known to move up to 10 inches. People who work in that building told me they look at their toilet bowl, it looks like a tile wave is in. Bookcases have been known to topple over. And for a building that opened up in 1974, I think this is very interesting. From the beginning, there have been an equal number of restrooms for ladies as for gentlemen. Highly unusual for a building of that vintage. Okay, coming up next on your right is a building that has serrated edges like your bread knife at home. It has those light brown horizontal stones and those windows. This is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Center, 1986. The architects, Fujikawa and Johnson. I don't know what anybody here does for a living, but some of you better be in the private sector. Not everybody can be a government employee, okay? If you work in the private sector, you've got a couple goals. Number one, make as much money as you legally can. There's nothing wrong with that. Number two, you want a corner office. Think of this, folks. If a building is rectangular in shape, you can only have one office in each corner. Quatre pour étage, 4 on each floor. By serrating the edges, you can have 4 in each corner, 16 on each floor. Think of all the egos you can take care of. Reduce stress, envy, competition. Put more emphasis on we rather than me. Pretty neat idea. Okay, coming up next on our right, my second favorite building on the river, the Lyric Opera House in Chicago, home to Chicago's great Lyric Opera Company. This building opened up in 1929. It's an Art Deco building designed by Graham Anderson Probst and White. The building opened up 1 week after the stock market crashed. Not a good time to open an opera house or anything else. The opening night opera, Giuseppe Verdi's Aida. We see 3,800 people for Grand Opera. Only New York's Metropolitan has a larger seating capacity. We're looking at the back of the opera stage. The V in building is because the Romans did not use our U in their alphabet, and many architects incorporated the V. Now, the Opera House is surrounded by an office building. A lot of lawyers, accountants, insurance companies, non-governmental organizations, charitable groups like to office in that building. The rentals are considered rather reasonable given the location. And if you enjoy some of the world's greatest voices and music, you get to hear it for free. Pretty good idea. On your right, this is the new Bank of America Merrill Lynch building in Chicago. Gensler and Company Architects. Building is held up by these tridents with 3 circular steel and aluminum tubes that we see on our right. This is the hottest real estate location for companies in Chicago currently. So all the big law firms, accounting firms, and so on want to office in this building. Creates some problems because of the pandemic. We have a lot of vacant office space in our central business district. Every other city in the world does also. So if companies move into that building, what happens to all the other vacant space? In Chicago, it looks like many of them will be turned into residential areas, but it's too early to tell what will really happen. Coming up next on our right is a red brick building with ivy on it. The building is not important, but the location is. In the year 1860, the National Republican Political Party held their second national nominating convention in a building on this site. It was called the Wigwam. And that is where they picked as their presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln, who would become the 16th president of the United States. Okay, our captains are taking us back into the main branch of the river. On your right, you may notice a lot of people sitting, sleeping, smooching, reading, working their computers, whatever. Those are genuine LL Bean Adirondack chairs from Freeport, Maine. Very popular area with people on a lovely day like this. So we're going back into the main branch of the river. Off on your left there, that was Wolf Point, the first settled area in the city of Chicago by non-natives. If you were here in the 1830s, what you would have found here was 3 taverns, a trading post, and a building they called a hotel, though it may have had some other uses as well. There was nothing of a cultural or religious grouping in Chicago until almost 1840. The first Christian group in this area were Methodists, followed by Roman Catholics, the Irish, and then the German immigration, followed by Jews and other groups. Okay, coming up on your left is a huge gray granite building that opened up in 1933 at a cost of $35 million. This is over 2 square blocks in size, 800,000 square feet. It's called the Merchandise Mart of Chicago. It was built by the estate of Marshall Field and Company. Marshall Field was our premier department store. Their catchphrase was, "Give the ladies what they want." Good for you, ladies. Not so bad for us until the bills came in. Field had 14 warehouses around the city. He wanted to consolidate. The problem was the timing. 1933, the Depression, then the Second World War. The building is never more than 30% occupied. So in 1946, they sold the building to Joe Kennedy of Boston for $17 million. Built for $35, he buys it for $17. The Kennedys keep it until 1998, when they sold it to a real estate investment firm for $108 million. Those bronze heads on pillars facing the building. When David Letterman broadcast his show from Chicago, he called them giant Pez machines. The building had its own zip code until 8 years ago. And if you're here at dusk, we project artwork from the Art Institute of Chicago, Museum of Contemporary Art, other art galleries onto the facade of that building. Okay, next on your left, the Chicago Cuts Steakhouse building. The architects Pickard and Chilton of New Haven, Connecticut. This is the most environmentally up-to-date building in Chicago. They actually take water out of this river, purify it, use it in their heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, return it to the river, cleaner than when it came out. They're looking for a named tenant, and they'll put your name on that building. So far, no one's come up with whatever they're asking. Next on your left is the Reed Murdoch building from 1908. This is a building favored by wholesale grocers, particularly Monarch Foods. Boats would pull up on the water, load and unload. There are railroad tracks on the other side of this building. There's a tall center column with a clock face. People didn't have their own wristwatches until the middle of the 20th century. So how'd you know what time it was? Church bells, sunrise, sunset, clock towers like this. If you grew up in Chicago like I did, you get your driver's license when you were 16. You never wanted to go into that building. That's where traffic court was. And then you had a couple of tickets and your parents didn't even know. Okay, are there any lawyers on board? Any attorneys? Thank you. I can have a boatload of attorneys. They won't raise their hand. We've intimidated them, and we need you desperately. Okay. The building on your left says RPM Seafood. This is the headquarters of the American Bar Association. The architect, Walter Netsch Jr. He is the architect of the Air Force Academy Chapel in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and the University of Illinois at Chicago. Originally, it was the Quaker Oats building. Okay, next on your left, the Corn Cobs of Chicago. Marina City, Bertrand Goldberg, architect. 2 towers. Middle-class people were beginning to move out of Chicago to the suburbs in the 1960s. Goldberg said, I've got an idea that will keep them in the city. This is the result. If you have a boat, you can park it at the lowest level. Various places to eat and drink over the years. Valet parking, and then studio and 1-bedroom units. They sell 3 to 350,000. They're not overly large because they're wedge-shaped, like a piece of pie or a slice of cheese. The TV psychologist Bob Newhart lived in this building for the Bob Newhart TV series. Scenes from Sleepless in Seattle, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the last movie the actor Steve McQueen made called The Hunter, he or a body double drove a car off there into the river. There's hardly a television show or a movie shot in Chicago that does not show you these buildings. Marina City, Bertrand Goldberg. This is ironic. He's the student of Mies van der Rohe. The very next building on your left, the old IBM building, Big Blue. This is the last building to be designed by Mies van der Rohe before Mies passes away. So you've got the master and teacher right next to the student. Today this building is the headquarters of the American Medical Association. Think of that. Doctors and lawyers within 1 block of each other. Makes some of us nervous. I have both of my family. We should come to Thanksgiving dinner. We haven't even sat down. They'll be yelling and screaming at each other. It's a riot. Okay, coming up next on your left, Trump Tower in Chicago. The 2nd tallest building in Chicago. 92 stories high. 1,363 feet high. 90 feet shorter than the Willis or Sears Tower. The tallest building in the world on a concrete foundation. The architect, Adrian Smith of Chicago. The bottom 2 floors were for retail. The building opens up in 2008. They've never leased out a store. Some critics think they're using it to reduce their property taxes, leaving vacant. 16 floors of a hotel and then condominium apartments. It's a beautiful building, folks, and very controversial, as you can imagine. It says Trump, 30-foot high letters. Mr. Trump has been quoted as saying, my name on this building will become as famous as the words Hollywood over the hills of Los Angeles. Okay. Next on your left, the Wrigley Building. White terracotta, 1925-26, first air-conditioned office building in the world. But across the road, a building with the American flag, a Gothic tower, flying buttresses, all the decorations of Gothic architecture. This was the home to the Chicago Tribune newspaper. It's where the reporters and editors worked for 1926 until 7 years ago. Today, it's a condominium building. Now, why would you build a Gothic-looking tower in the 1920s? The Gothic age had ended hundreds of years before. Well, the owner of the Tribune, Colonel Robert McCormick, had fought in France during World War I. He had an affair de coeur, an affair of the heart. He fell in love, not with a beautiful woman. He fell in love with Gothic architecture. Came back, held a competition, and picked that design. Coming up next on your left, my graduate school alma mater, University of Chicago, Graduate School of Business. Dirk Lohan, grandson of Mies van der Rohe, architect. Those are the classrooms on the west wall with no windows. How can you have classrooms without windows? It's the University of Chicago. It's a little different kind of place. When the business school professor said no windows, we don't want our students looking at the river, and we don't want them listening to Ed. He was an urban studies major. They got their way. But look at their offices. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Not fair. Next on your left, NBC Tower in Chicago. Looks very much like NBC Tower in New York City. The architect, Adrian Smith, of the Burj Khalifa and of the Trump Tower. That's 1986. For 7 years, the Oprah Winfrey Show was broadcast from that building. Then Oprah built her own studio west of the Chicago River called Harpo, which is Oprah spelled backwards. That has been torn down, and on its site today, the world headquarters of McDonald's Corporation. Okay, we're coming up to the Sheraton Chicago Hotel on your left. The fourth largest hotel in Chicago. The largest in terms of rooms, the Hyatt Regency here on Wacker. Number 2, the Hilton on South Michigan. 3, the Palmer House in our downtown area. This is number 4. Now the top 3 floors in this hotel have 10-inch thick bulletproof glass. It's where presidents and heads of state stay when they're in Chicago. Every Chicago president going back to, or every United States president going back to William Jefferson Clinton has stayed in this hotel, with 2 exceptions. Barack Obama, he had his own house in Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago, and Donald Trump. Now, the main ballroom in this hotel, when it's completely opened up, is the size of 3 National Football League fields. So if you were having an event up there, you could go all night without seeing your guests. Unbelievable. Anyhow, we're so glad to see people here from everywhere. We've missed you terribly over the last couple of years. When you open up a hotel like this, it's just not flipping a switch. Any idea how many mattresses had to be turned? Any idea how many hundreds of thousands of gallons of water added to their swimming pools? How many employees had to be brought back and checked out back to work? Okay, the river that we're on. Originally, this river flowed into Lake Michigan. It no longer does. It flows away from the lake. It flowed into Lake Michigan. We got all the drinking water out of Lake Michigan. We still do get our drinking water out of Lake Michigan. But in the 19th century, this was our sewage system. We dumped all of our industrial and human waste into this river, which flowed into the lake. We had flavored water here before Evian ever thought of the idea. We also had every epidemic imaginable. So beginning in 1880, the city said we're going to reverse the course of this river. They spent over 20 years damming, dynamiting, digging, diverting, channeling, and when it opened up in 1901, at gravity feed, the river could be 16 feet lower than the lake. But that meant at that time, all of our garbage flowed behind our boat, down that south branch that we were on, eventually into the Mississippi, where it oozed slowly past St. Louis, down to New Orleans. Those folks were not happy. They filed suit all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The court said it would not hear the case. People in New Orleans basically said, we're used to adversity, we'll learn how to live with it. People in St. Louis were mighty upset. We went to see a man named Bush. He said, I've got an idea. We can take that dirty brown water. We can put it into brown tinted bottles. We can put a label on it, Budweiser. We'll send it back to those folks in Chicago. Never quite happened that way, folks. But Chicago and St. Louis, very competitive with each other. 5 times larger than they are. We're only 5 hours apart by automobile. They have the heat and humidity, radio station KMOX, and the Cardinals who beat the Cubs. Right? 99 out of every 100 years. Okay. We're now heading east. Coming up on your left there will be Chicago's Navy Pier. I bet some of you are going to go to Navy Pier when you leave our boat. It's a 5-minute walk on dry land. Navy Pier opened up in 1916. It is 3/4 of a mile from the west end of Navy Pier to the east end of Navy Pier. It opened up as a commercial and tourist pier. Boats would pick people up here, take them to places like Milwaukee, Detroit, and elsewhere. In the late 1930s, the United States Navy took control of Navy Pier. They closed it to civilians. The Navy took 2 passenger ships, the Sable and the Wolverine, and altered their tops, turning them into makeshift aircraft carriers. We had a Naval Air Combat Training Station about 30 miles north of Chicago called the Glenview Naval Air Training Station. During World War II, 10,000 combat pilots trained here. They would fly down and do touchdowns and takeoffs on those makeshift aircraft carriers. We never lost a pilot, folks. Well, there's 70-some planes that we know of out there in Lake Michigan. Mechanical malfunctions, and the pilots had a parachute to safety. The 2 most famous pilots who've ever trained here, former President George Bush and the late nighttime talk show host, Johnny Carson. He had a buddy, Ed McMahon. Ed was a Marine Naval aviator who trained here at the Navy Pier. You want to take some photos of one of the great skylines of the world? This is the opportunity to do that. And I'll just continue talking as we head back to port. After World War II, Navy Pier became a 2-year branch of the University of Illinois. We had no 4-year public university in Chicago at that time. $100 a semester in 1960 when I went there my freshman year before I went elsewhere. That won't even get you a paragraph in the book today. Okay. Anyhow, starting in the 1980s, Navy Pier became what it is today. Souvenir shops, restaurants, places to drink, a hotel, meeting rooms, several carnival-type rides, including that Ferris wheel. Now, the Ferris wheel is very symbolic in Chicago because the first Ferris wheel anywhere in the world, here in Chicago, for the 1893 World Fair that was held in Jackson Park, on the site of where the Museum of Science and Industry is located today. The people that organized that World Fair, they wanted something to symbolize the fair. First person they approached, a man named Charles Eiffel. And Mr. Eiffel said, I built a tower for the Paris Fair of 1890. People seem to like my tower. I'll build you a taller tower. Basically, we said, what, chopped liver? We want something original. They found an engineer in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, George Washington Ferris. He came up with the first Ferris wheel. That's the 4th large one we've had on Navy Pier. Interestingly, its predecessor is now in Branson, Missouri, clogging up traffic even more. Okay, we're heading back to port. We ask that everyone please remain seated until we're tied, docked, until Mr. Christian here opens up that gate, the gangplank goes down. I'll be the first one off to say thank you to you, answer any questions that you may have. Folks, we hope you had a good time with us this afternoon. Thanks for coming to Chicago. We love having you. You're in a great city, folks. Great music, great museums, and great food. Forget about all those 5-star restaurants. You don't want to leave town without trying a real Chicago hot dog. Just remember, no ketchup on your Chicago hot dog. No. There's a good one out on Navy Pier. I like a chain called Portillo's. Ah, it's breezy once again. So you go visit your sister?